Hello friends, Speedball Mike Bailey here, back with another video about professional wrestling. This one is about match quality, and it's a long video to explain the very simple statement, something that I say very often: match quality accounts for 90% of your success in pro wrestling. That sounds like an oversimplification, and it requires a lot of explanation. But before we get into it, if you're watching this on Patreon, thank you so much for supporting. And if you've stumbled across this video or it was sent to you, please give me a comment, feedback, your thoughts. I think this is the 6th of those videos that I have made. So there's 5 more that I hope you have watched. That you probably should watch in order leading up to this one. But regardless, thank you for watching, and I need your thoughts, feedback, opinions in order to know what is helpful and what other videos to make next, because teaching pro wrestling doesn't work unless it's a conversation. My intention is not for these things to be lectures. It's meant to be interactive, because that's the only way, in my opinion, learning works, especially for something as subjective as professional wrestling, right? And this is a very abstract video. We'll get back to more practical stuff, but this is something that's very important and I think needs to be discussed a lot more, right? So, title of the video, what is match quality? Or, need to zoom in a little bit. The real 5 stars are the friends we made along the way, right? Why is that the title? I don't know, because I felt like it. Okay, so here's my initial claim, right? Match quality accounts for 90% of your success in professional wrestling, which again is I understand that that's a very bold take, but give me the chance to explain. Well, so first of all, right, I say 90%. Because the other 10% is all stuff that you can't control. Things like where you're born, your genetics, what you look like, the connections that you have, and all that, which again is very important and is essential in a lot of ways. Things like social media, even though social media kind of works into your matches a lot, so it kind of factors into match quality. But it's a very optimistic figure. Right, that's why I say 90%, knowing that what you can't control only accounts for 10% of your success is very optimistic, but also it's entirely made up, and you can't really verify it. We can't do studies. It's not a scientific number, so I think 90% is fun to go off of, right? So what is match quality, right? Could also just say, what is a good match? What is having a good match? Well, to put it simply, having a good match or match quality is whatever helps you reach your goals, whatever they may be in terms of pro wrestling. It's a complex notion, I think, what is a good match. It depends on context, it depends on situation, but truly, to me, a good match, especially at an independent level, is a match that helps you get better, which should be your number one priority when it comes to your success right now. Eventually, when you are signed to a company and paid millions of dollars to do professional wrestling, then maybe that will be a priority among just, getting better and practicing. But when you're starting out as an independent wrestler, what you need to do if you want to reach your goals is to get better and develop your skill set. So that's a big part of that, right? Progress leads to success as an independent wrestler. A good match is one that helps you get better, which eventually leads to you being successful. And a big part of that, which is going to be a constant in terms of what I refer to as a goal when I talk about match quality, get more bookings. More, not just in terms of quantity, but higher quality bookings as well. Work more, get to do more matches, get to own your craft even more. That's all the goal in having good matches, right? And when I say, again, get better, success, that's all nice and good. You get better through having matches, through having bookings, but getting better at what? And the answer to that is a lot more complex than you would think. And that's the part that I think makes this video very important, right? Okay, so now back to it. Back to my initial notion. Match quality is 90% of your success, but what is match quality and how do we break it down? How do we measure it? What are the factors that make up a good match or match quality, right? How do we measure it, right? And then there's a number of factors. Obviously, the reaction of the audience. That is the number one, probably most well understood thing that you will think about when you think about what is a good match is how did the audience react to it. You're an entertainer, you're a performer, you're performing. Your goal is to give a performance that elicits, a reaction, an emotional reaction. Whether you're heel or face, you want to get something out of the audience. They paid to see a show, and they are the foundation upon which the pro wrestling world works, is that people want to pay to see it, right? So a good match, the audience was chanting, holy shit, this is awesome the whole time, versus audience being quiet. Do either of those mean you have a good or a bad match? And the answer to that is, to ask it in a more direct way, if the audience was reacting loud, popping, and chanting for your entire match, is it a good match? And the answer is, well, maybe. We don't know yet, because there's a lot of other factors. The second one, that's also, oftentimes the case, is there's a promoter who hired you to do the job, right? So this is the situation. You had the crazy holy shit match. This is awesome. Chants the whole time. Audience off their feet. Ended in a standing ovation. But you went 15 minutes. And the promoter wanted you to do a nice, light 6-minute opener to kick off the show. And now the promoter is mad at you, right? Promoter wanted something specific. The audience loved it, but you did not give the promoter what they wanted. Is that a good match? And the answer is, well, maybe. Because there's more to explore, right? Both sides of that are equally important. Maybe you're working for a very influential audience that is very connected to social media, and they're going to talk about your good match a lot, and that is going to do more for your career. You're going to get more bookings out of the audience enjoying your match and talking about it than the promoter being happy about your match and booking you again. Maybe that promoter is runs very bad shows, runs shows occasionally, and you don't care about working for him again, so the audience is worth a lot more, right? And then there's the flip side of that, where the promoter is very influential, runs a lot of shows, a lot of bookings. His opinion of you is more important. So if he wants you to have a match where the audience doesn't really react as much for whatever reason, then that could be worth more for your career, right? So in either of these scenarios, is it a good match? And the answer, again, well, maybe, right? Because this is the other, this one is probably the most important factor. When I say 90% of your success is decided by match quality, your peers, coworkers, opponents, whatever you want to call it, the people you share the ring with, they have a huge impact on how your career goes. Pro wrestling is a human thing. It's a team sport. You're all working together, right? Going back to hypothetical scenarios here, your audience fucking loves the match. They're going crazy for it. Promoter is like, man, super happy. I love what you did out there. Great. But the guy you worked with, you were a nightmare to plan with. He didn't get anything in because you were too obsessed with getting all your shit in and it didn't work. You were bad to work with. So this guy, next time your name is going to come up, hey, do you want to work with this guy again? He goes, hell no. And maybe that has a bigger impact on your career than the promoter in the audience, right? There's also the other side of that. Audience doesn't give a shit about your match. You try way too hard. You go 15 minutes and do a bunch of high spots, but the audience does not give a shit. The promoter wanted you to go 6 minutes in an opener, and he's like, why did you guys do all this stuff? That's not what I wanted from you guys. But your opponent is like, I had a fucking blast. I wanted to do those hard 15 minutes, and I think if we do the same match at these other 3 promotions where I work regularly, I'm sure it'll go great and it'll be awesome. I should get you booked on there. We should work together more. right? That's something that's extremely valuable as well. And then, does that make it a good match? And the answer continues to be maybe, right? And when I talk about opponent, I made a note of this because it's important to talk about, but planning and comfort, things like working light, being fun to wrestle, taking your time and knowing how to feel your opponent and communicate in the match, and planning is the biggest one. If planning sucks, I don't want to work with another person again. If they don't know what they do, if they interrupt you while you're talking, if they're just bad at negotiating and sharing their ideas, there's a lot of tricks and methodology that goes into planning a match that I've talked about a lot, but just like, again, think about how that hour goes, right? If you watch the structure video, I talk a lot about having 1 hour that goes by real fast in which to plan the entirety of your match. It's very easy to spend that hour just like saying nothing and wasting time, which is not ideal. I want people to have their ideas clear, to communicate efficiently, and be able to make the match quickly so that we're able to focus on what's important together. And being good at that part of planning is, again, very important in terms of your career as a whole, right? Okay. And then back to more theoretical scenarios, right? So let's say this is all bad. The audience hated your match. It was weird, as did the promoter. And your opponent is also not happy with the match. And the reason all that happened is because you wanted to try a new gimmick. You wanted to try a vampire gimmick where you had a cape, you have makeup on, you've been working on this for like years, right? You have whole Google Docs filled with potential backstories and promos and things you could do as this vampire, and you made the gear, you've been thinking about it for 2 years, and then you finally tried it and it didn't work at all. And so no one was happy with the match. The audience, weird vampire gimmick that didn't land. Promoter didn't like the vampire gimmick either because it didn't work, and your opponent was like, I wanted to have a good match and you just did this silly vampire gimmick. But now, you know. You learned a very important lesson in not doing that vampire gimmick. It's done. I can take it out of my head and move forward, and that's going to have a great impact on your wrestling career. The fact that you learned something. So yourself, right? This is a very extreme example that I'm getting, but sometimes it's like audience was meh, promoters like, yeah, match was fine, and your opponent had a good time, but the match became more difficult because you tried a bunch of new things that you wanted to try or just work on, even though it wasn't time. And so you're happy with the match, right? That counts for something. That counts for a lot. And again, in this scenario, does that mean you had a good match? And answer, well, maybe, right? Because there's the last factor that I've identified, which is a lot more abstract one, right? So this is the extreme scenario that I like to give to make it an example, right? Same vampire, right? Except in this time, audience hates it, promoter hates it, your opponent hated it, and it's like your fourth time trying the gimmick, and it doesn't work at all, and yet you keep trying it because you really want to, but you're not really learning anything at this point. But upon rewatching the match, you find a clip that's really funny, or someone took a clip with their phone of the vampire, and that clip goes mega viral, millions of views, doubles your count of Instagram followers, promotions hit you up and are like, hey, we have a weird kooky show and your vampire gimmick would work really great on this one, right? More into that same example, I film a vlog, so I made sure to film my own match, and it was just bad. I fucked up. None of it worked well. Audience not happy because I kept botching. My promoter not happy because I botched. Opponent disappointed, and I'm disappointed because I just botched, and I can learn something from it, but at this point it's minimal. But I did film the match on my GoPro, and I made a vlog where I broke down the match, talked about how I felt going into it, how disappointed I was afterwards, discussed the clips of the match, and it made for a really great video of me talking about how bummed I am about my performance. Made me connect to the audience, humanized me, made something really simple to understand and made the audience want to follow along with my learning curve in pro wrestling. And is that a good match? And again, the answer is well, maybe, but that's a good factor, right? So this is, I have like a more distant audience is kind of what I used to refer to this, because there's a direct audience that watches your match, and then it's going to be viewed in other ways, right? Another good example of this, you know what, I'm going to change it to indirect audience, because sometimes there's a different group that watches at home, or that will rewatch in the future 3 years from now, and maybe love that match in retrospect. It was different for the time. It was something unique, right? So there's a direct audience to consider, and there's right. I'm gonna even write this direct audience right here. There's a direct audience in front of which you're performing, whether that's live or through the cameras, to consider, but there's also an indirect audience, and that's something to consider as well, right? As I wrote it, content, rewatchability, viral potential, things like that. Should be noted also, this is a non-exhaustive list. Those are the 5 factors that I like to isolate to talk about, but it's much more than that, and it's fully context dependent, right? So your dad, your coach, etc., maybe your trainer who is helping you start your pro wrestling career wanted you to do something specific for this match. And so even if it doesn't hit any of the other factors, right, that's a very unique scenario. Maybe your dad is in the crowd and you wanted to have a special match for your dad, and making him happy is much more important than all the other factors. There is an infinity of potential factors that could go. Once again, it's all context dependent, right? It depends what kind of wrestling. Of course, I'm talking mostly about Western independent professional wrestling. But also, for example, one of the biggest one, right, is if you have a match, a squash match, a dark match, whatever, on TV, right, it becomes very different. What is important for your match? Like, the audience does not matter at all. Your opponent matters a decent amount. But usually, like, there's executives, there's people in the back, there's suits, there's people that hire, that make those decisions in a lot more direct way. And you're trying to please those people, the people that will decide whether or not you get a job, whether or not they offer you a contract. Those are the most important. And then when you get signed to a TV deal and you're working storylines, a big part of your matches might be not doing cool stuff, having a match that the audience hates for whatever reason or doesn't like, because that's where you fit on the show. But it gets a lot more complicated, right? The important thing to know in all this is that I want you to be able to decide. I want you to be in control. I want you to isolate and think about every match contextually and think, what do I need to focus on? What kind of match do I need to have to maximize my chances at success in professional wrestling, which is a difficult thing to do, right? So let me get into practical examples, things that actually happen, things that happened to me. I went to a show to watch a couple weeks ago, and this was the case, right? I say a fair show, meaning like at a county fair or whatever, but this was not the case, but it was the similar audience, right? Where it was children in the crowd or their parents that were drinking. Two groups that will have, in terms of audience, they will have very little impact on the success in your career. They won't talk about it. They won't tweet about it. They kind of reacted to every match equally, regardless of how good it was, because they were kind of half paying attention to the whole show. So in this case, like, you can put aside the audience a little bit. Of course, the goal is to maximize all the factors. You still want the audience to have a good time, but you can also put on a good match just with the person you're wrestling. Let's just have a fun match that we want to have, even though we know that a lot of the high spots or stories are going to go way over the audience's head. Sometimes that doesn't matter. Sometimes we're just going to have this match here where the audience really doesn't care, in order to get better at doing that match when we do have a chance to do it in front of an audience that'll be more meaningful, right? Oh yeah, I wrote this one. A rich promoter has a lot of money, promoter pays you a lot more than anywhere else you work, and it actually has makes a difference in your finances. This promoter doesn't pay you $20-$30 just to say, hey, thank you, like other promoters. This one, he gives you something that you can actually use to pay part of your rent, which is a common scenario, was for me for a long time. But this promoter is slightly misguided, but he is very rich, and in his head, his shows are TVs, and then you'll have a pay-per-view, even though they run monthly. So that's just not true. There's no pay-per-view. The pay-per-view is literally the same at all the other shows. But he tells you, hey, this match, don't do a single move, don't do anything, just work the babyface's leg, and then we're going to do a program that leads up to the next show, right? So you're not going to hit, like, maybe your opponent is going to want to do stuff, and you're going to have to say, no, sorry, we can't. Promoter said work the leg, and the audience is not going to care. You're also going to be kind of bored with the match, and then there won't be much you can do with the footage, but the promoter goes, yes, that was awesome. That match, which objectively, according to all the other factors, was mostly terrible, but promoter loves it, and he offers you a bunch more bookings, and you get to make money and maybe eventually get good opponents, and you've decided that was going to be the best route for the success in your career. Then that's a very practical example. That's a thing that is common. Another one that is extremely common, that happens to every successful pro wrestler, right, is a big name. You wrestle a guy who is very influential in the wrestling business. He is well connected to major promotions. Maybe he even has a podcast that is listened to by a lot of wrestlers, and he will talk about his experience in working with you. But let's say he is very old, he is very injured, he is no longer very good at pro wrestling, but he is very famous and well connected, right? The audience will react to him, but will they enjoy the match? Maybe not. Maybe that doesn't matter at all for this. And then the promoter wants you to be a big heel and him to be a big face because they're paying him a lot of money. But he is very insistent that he can only work as a heel because he is very limited, because his knees are both totally destroyed, right? And then you're not going to do much in this match. And there won't be, well, there might be something to do with the match, right? Just because it's fun, but there won't be like any action. But he is very influential, so you can sacrifice all the other factors in order for your opponent to be pleased with working with you, because that is what's more important in this case, right? So that being said, the goal is to maximize all the metrics, right? You want to do the most. In that scenario where you work with a big name, you still want to get the audience to have a good time as much as possible. You want to make the promoter as happy as possible. Of course, you want to be as satisfied, but there's a priority. So you try to do the most, but you might have to sacrifice some in exchange for others. And also, like, you can't please everyone. You cannot hit all metrics equally every single time. You will have to sacrifice some. You just have to know and get good at which ones, and know what kind of match and what kind of attitude you need to bring to a certain show in order to, again, maximize match quality, which in turn maximizes your chance at success, right? Another thing that is important to remember that I think ties it all together is that no matter how good you do, someone is going to shit on your performance. Whether that's the audience immediately, whether it's one guy in the crowd that's going to hate it, whether it's other wrestlers in the back that are going to dislike what you do. You cannot please everyone. You can only try your best and, once again, maximize all of those metrics, but you have to be intelligent about which ones you choose to maximize, right? And I just want everyone to be aware of that. I'm making this video because this is a complicated notion. I feel like a lot of people that are influential in professional wrestling approach many of these things as an absolute. A lot of people say, with a very old school mentality, this is something that you actually hear, but the promoter is most important. The audience doesn't matter at all. And will or it's all about the audience always, all the time, and everything else is second. Or you got to be a good brother. That is the main thing, when that's not true. In reality, as I explained, and is my belief and something that I've followed in my 20 years of professional wrestling, you really have to make the choice and understand what will be best for your career and how I can maximize all those metrics, right? So when I say that match quality accounts for 90% of your success, you need to understand how complex match quality is, and I think a good part of that is just it's those factors and it's what you can control. The other 10% you have very little control over. Again, it's a very optimistic figure, right? The fact that you can control 90% of your success in your career is a it's a good notion, optimistic notion. That'd be awesome. I'm not sure it's accurate, but who could measure? Okay, thank you all so much for watching. Once again, if you're on the Patreon, thank you so much for supporting. If you're not, I insist that you send me feedback, notes, anything, any thoughts you had while watching this, any notes you took, and please share it with other pro wrestlers and tell them to get in touch with me as well. I am very responsive when it comes to messages, especially from other pro wrestlers who have questions about these topics that I'm doing my best to cover, because it's all extremely difficult.